So we jump into a video by Jacob Pando where he tries to explain why atheists reject God without being self-aware enough to realize that atheists are doing their rational due diligence and he's just making irrational, unintelligible claims. What else is new for a theist, right? But theists like these are just doing their own side unimaginable harm and making themselves a laughingstock. Not because everyone is out to get them, but because they can't see through their own religious ignorance. So here goes Jacob proving why the religious are so intellectually terrible and why nobody ought to believe in their imaginary friend.
Hello, my fellow skeptics and Christians. Jacob here.
Hey Jacob, how's it going?
So I made a video a while back in which I argued that there was only one reason why atheists really reject a God.
Now, since I really doubt that you know much, if anything, about what atheists think or why they think it, forgive me if I take your claim with a huge mound of salt. But please, continue.
And it has nothing to do with any miracle stated in the Bible.
No, I really don't care what the Bible says because the Bible can't be proven using objective evidence, logic, or reason to be factually true. This is especially true of its supernatural claims. You just can't intellectually justify any of it. Now that I've got that out of the way, by all means, go on.
It has nothing to do with talking snakes. It has nothing to do with talking donkeys. It has nothing to do with Noah's flood.
No, none of those things are worth considering because none of those things can be shown to have happened in the real world, which is all that I personally care about. Now, yes, all of those things are ridiculous on their face, just as stories of your man-god coming back to life and floating up into heaven are. But that's not why I'm not a Christian. But let's see if you can guess, okay?
Okay, because if we assume that a God exists,
and that's your problem. You're just assuming that a God exists without being able to prove your assumption is factually correct. There is no reason outside of emotion for anyone to make that assumption.
then every miracle stated in the Bible is automatically possible.
Possible, just not demonstrable. And since all of this is just silly, irrational, wishful thinking, presented without a shred of independently, objectively verified fact, what difference does that make?
Simply because God exists.
Which is still not a validated position to take. It's just wishful thinking.
Specifically the God of the Bible, who created all of space and time, who isn't subject to space-time, and who is eternal. God is eternal.
See, this is one reason that atheists reject God, because people like you, people who are asserting that God is real in the first place, are perfectly willing to tell us all about this imaginary friend of yours, but you can't actually show that he's real. I mean, I could tell you all about Bobo the tree god, what he wants, what he can do, all of his characteristics, but that doesn't make Bobo real, nor does it mean that you should believe in Bobo, which you absolutely should not because I just made him up. It's sad that you can't recognize that you're doing the exact same thing.
So, when someone asks you, how do we measure God?
I'm not asking how you measure God. I'm asking how you prove he's real, because that's something that you conveniently haven't gotten to. Why don't you give that a try?
That's like asking, how do we measure infinity?
There is no such thing as infinity. It's a mathematical construct that doesn't exist in the real world. Just like your God.
How do we measure eternal?
Again, no such thing. So you're comparing your God to things that we know are imaginary in the real world. You know, Jacob, you're closer to the truth than you're willing to admit.
If we could measure God, if we could fit him in our little box of ideas, then it wouldn't be God, because God is an eternally space-timeless existing entity.
all of which is just irrational gobbledygook that makes no sense in reality. You're just spouting nonsense that you can't demonstrate is so, nor can you provide any reason why your ramblings should be taken seriously. You have no means to show how you know any of this, how you intellectually obtained this information, how you objectively verified it to be true, or why anyone should pay any attention to your claims. You're just being crazy.
So I kind of find it amusing when atheists say, well, how do we gain objective proof of the existence of God?
And we find it amusing that you refuse to even consider the question, because we're simply asking you to put up or shut up, and you're pretending that's a bizarre concept. How do you know that what you believe about God is actually so? Because it says it in a book? Well, how do you know the book is true? We just go around and around and around with this, and you can offer no reason why your interpretation of a book of mythology accurately represents reality. Sorry, until you can do that, I have no reason to respect or accept your claims.
Now, it's easy for us to deduct the idea of a God based on how creation works, based on the fact that space-time came into existence.
You just can't show that it didn't do so naturally, that it can't be explained scientifically. And since we have yet to run into anything that science has been utterly unable to evaluate rationally, even if we don't have the specific knowledge at the moment to completely understand it, this is just an argument from ignorance. You don't know, so you think you can just make something up to explain it. But that's not how things work, whether you like it or not.
So we know exactly what was needed for space-time to have come into existence.
And exactly where did you write this up in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, and when did you collect your Nobel Prize, Mr. Pando? Because, yeah, you're just wrong.
We know that whatever created space-time must have been eternal.
We know nothing of the sort. First, you're just assuming that something created it, that it didn't happen naturally. You're also assuming that whatever created it couldn't have likewise been created. You're assuming that the natural laws of our universe somehow apply to all potential universes. These are a lot of assumptions that you're just not capable of backing up.
It must have been always existing, otherwise we wouldn't exist in the first place.
Makes no rational sense at all. But this is what happens when the uneducated try to make guesses about the world without having the slightest idea what the world is actually like.
Secondly, it needs to have the ability to create space-time and matter, for that matter.
That's kind of a given. Now prove that your God has that ability. Don't just claim it, prove it. But since you can't even prove your God is real, I suspect this isn't going anywhere.
It had to be able to create matter. Fundamentally, it had to be inherent in its existence for it to create space and time.
Criteria that you simply assert without evidence, based on your own wishful thinking and emotional desire.
So we deductively look at the criteria that was needed for space-time to have come into existence, and we use a deduction to come to the conclusion of an entity with these traits.
There is no reason whatsoever why whatever generated the universe had to be an entity. There's no reason that it had to be sentient, no reason it had to be alive, and certainly no reason why it had to be eternal, nor that it still has to exist, nor that it has to give a damn about the universe that it generated. All of those are pie-in-the-sky assertions that you're making without evidence. Back it up.
With the ability to be eternal, to be space-timeless, not subject to matter, but who has the ability to create matter. And we don't even know if God perhaps, in essence, has some material essence to him, where he's kind of transparent, in which he can be both material or immaterial.
Sure we do. The first law of logic, the law of non-contradiction, requires that. Now, that's true only if we assume that this imaginary friend of yours operates in this universe because Anything that does must be subject to the physical, natural, and logical laws that operate within our universe. So the characteristics of God cannot logically contradict themselves, and if they do, then God has nothing at all to do with our universe if he exists at all.
But, so this video is basically,
a complete waste of time. But we knew that, right?
addressing my last video, because my last video had some analogies and ideas which were totally twisted and misconstrued.
Well, without going back to look at your last video, which I'm probably not going to do, but maybe what happened is that your ideas are just ridiculous and irrational, and people pointed out how asinine and unjustifiable your claims are, and you just didn't like it. Well, too bad. It doesn't matter what you like, it matters what you can prove. You really need to get on that.
Most of which I believe was done purposefully.
Yes, skeptics pay attention to the silly rantings of the irrational religious so that we can debunk your absurd claims that are made without verification. Welcome to the real world, Jacob.
To try to hide my main argument.
Not hide, debunk. And that's because your argument is ridiculous.
So my main argument is, to just sum up everything, is that everything else in the Bible can be true
if and only if you can prove with objectively verifiable evidence and independent validation. Too bad that you can't do any of that, right?
if simply God exists.
If. If means nothing until you prove it. We will take you seriously when and not until you can back it up objectively.
And there are several arguments to prove why God exists, okay?
Arguments don't prove anything. Evidence proves things. Let us know when you have evidence.
And I'm going to leave some of those arguments down below in the description.
All of which, I'm sure, have been completely debunked. Not that you care.
I'm going to leave a few links there that hopefully you could take a look at and see that there's good arguments for the idea that a God does exist.
No, they are not. They are emotional reasons why people want to believe a God exists, but none that stand up to rational scrutiny.
I had made a lot of those arguments myself in several other videos.
Hopefully you did a better job than you've done in this video, because damn.
So I ain't going to go over them again here.
Yet you keep making videos that essentially say the same thing to people who didn't buy into them before because your emotions demand that you believe this thing that you cannot in any way show is real. Sure.
So, guys, I pray that you have a blessed day and you consider what I said in this video.
I have. At least when I could stop laughing. Because, geez, Jacob, you're just a poster boy for religious ignorance. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how to approach the subject rationally. You don't know how logic and reason work. You certainly don't know anything about science. All you know about is your emotional wants and desires and desperately trying to rationalize those things that you believe with a real world that simply doesn't support them. And I love theists who say if a lot. If God is real. If the Bible is trustworthy. If. I don't care about your ifs. I care about your proof. And if you can't figure out how to prove God, then you have no reason to think God is real. And if you have no reason to think that God is real, then you shouldn't believe in God any more than we should believe in alien abductions or the flat earth. Because they operate just like you do. They want these things to be real just like you do. And they can't show that any of it is, just like you can't. And that's why they're not taken seriously, nor should you be. Because that's something you ought to think about, Jacob, although I'm sure you won't, because your faith is blind and your beliefs are emotional. And when you think about it, that's kind of pathetic.